interim director of the Robert C. Byrd Center for Congressional History and Education on the campus of Shepherd University in historic Shepherdstown, West Virginia, on the banks of the Potomac River, about 70 miles from Washington, D.C. It's my pleasure to honor to introduce our speaker tonight. But before I do, a message from the Byrd Center. Tonight's program is the first of three anniversaries, our 20th anniversary series, Voices of the Community. And our area is blessed with an amazing array of talent on a wide range of professional experience. On March 23rd, join us for a talk by Harriet Pearson, who will talk on cybersecurity and policy, a citizen's overview. On April 20th, Marianne Hitt will speak on clean energy, coal, climate justice, and West Virginia's future. Of course, all of these programs at the Byrd Center are free to those of us here and also those of us who are watching on our YouTube channel. The Byrd Center is a nonprofit organization on the campus here, and we rely on our ability to operate on grants and on donations from folks like you. And I know many of you are already officially friends of the Byrd Center, and we would welcome you to if you're not, there's brochures outside the auditorium and also in the rotunda where you came in about joining the Friends group. And also we have a special program going now, a naming opportunity for the seats in this auditorium, a plaque with your name, the name of a loved one, which will be in this auditorium forever. And we've already started that. And those brochures are also out in the lobby and in the rotunda. And we thank you very much for your ongoing support. Tonight, we're honored to present David Hammer, Circuit Court Judge of the West Virginia Supreme Court of Appeals, where he has served since 2018. Before that, for many years, he was a partner in the distinguished Martinsburg law firm of Hammer, Ferretti, and Schiavone, where he specialized in civil rights cases on a wide variety. And he and Effie, who's here with us tonight, are residents of Shepherdstown. He has been a good steward of the historic courthouse in Charleston, where he presides. And of course, as you all know, that's the famous court where John Brown was tried and other important cases. And he, Judge Hammer, has always often spoken on the history of the court. I'm happy to say that the only times I've been summoned to that court have been for ceremonial occasions. And once when I was a wedding photographer. I think I touched your screen. At a wedding that Judge Hammer presided at. Tonight, Judge Hammer will speak to us on the important topic of treatment courts and the drug abuse crisis in West Virginia. Please welcome the Honorable David Hammer. Drop the paper there, sir. Ready for recycling now.
Well, thank you, Ray, for that kind introduction. And what a pleasure to kick off as the first speaker of the 20th anniversary of Community Theaters. We've been coming here for probably 20 years now, and this is such a wonderful resource. And I'm so glad to support it. And I want to thank Ray and Marianne Alexander and Elizabeth Ricketts. Just really, it's a terrific service. I know I forgot one person. Yes. So anyway, it's a terrific service. Thank you for being here. You're probably here because perhaps you are curious about treatment courts and about drug addiction, or perhaps you, a family member or a friend, who suffers from substance use addiction, disorder it's called. Or maybe you have the misfortune to get grabbed by my wife Effie and be forced to be here this evening. No matter the reason, thank you for being here.
Is the volume working now?
Is the microphone?
It's not loud.
But we hear you perfect.
You don't know how to turn it on.
For online.
Okay, well, I'll try and yell. It sounds like it's on.
No, it's better now.
Yeah, I'll try and yell a little bit more. Be directional.
So they go through this hour.
What we're going to talk about tonight are the treatment courts, the reasons for the treatment courts, the problems, the crisis of the drug epidemic, and in particular, the opioid epidemic. And so to start off, I want to start with a human dimension of the opioid epidemic. And this is one of the most catastrophic aspects of the opioid epidemic, which is drug overdose mortality. And you can see up on the screen, I have a map of the United States. And it shows you West Virginia being in green. This is a map from the National Center for Health Statistics. It shows drug overdose mortality by state. And this is for 2020. If you go to that site, you can look at previous years and you will see that West Virginia has unfortunately led the nation in this category for a long time. And as you look at it carefully, and I'll highlight it up a little bit, you can see that West Virginia's rate of death per 100,000 people leads the nation at 81.4 deaths. Our neighbor Kentucky, far behind us at 49.2. And if we drop down and look at other neighbors, such as Pennsylvania, 42.4, on down to Virginia at 26.6. Ohio's in there as well. You can see we have a rate that far exceeds any other state. Now, what have we sought to do in response to this problem? Well, in 2009, West Virginia passed the Drug Offender Accountability and Treatment Act. And I have a snippet of the statement of purpose of the act here. And you can see that the purpose is to reduce the incidence of substance abuse and crimes, to hold drug offenders accountable for their actions, to protect public safety, to reduce personal health and healthcare costs, to limit the spread of communicable disease, to assist with educational performance and attainment, workforce reliability and productivity, and to encourage family safety and financial stability. And to do this, you can see the 8 purposes of the article, including enhancing community safety and quality of life, reducing recidivism, repeat offenders, reducing substance abuse, increasing accountability, restoration of drug offenders to productive, law-abiding, tax-paying citizens, reducing the cost of incarceration, and improving the efficiency of the judicial system. And to do this, we have implemented since 2009 the treatment courts in West Virginia, including the treatment court that I supervise in Jefferson County. This slide continues the example of how many people are affected by loss of life in Jefferson County. This is what's called a provisional overdose death count for the 12 trailing months. Essentially, you take any 12 trailing months and you have provisional data. It's provisional because the cause of death is not to an absolute certainty, but it is believed that the cause of death is what it purports to be, in this case, drug overdose. And you can see that for any 12-month period, Jefferson County, is running at 38 deaths. So it's an astonishing death toll. By the way, if anyone has a question that's just burning them that they really want to ask, feel free, and I'll be happy to try and take it as we go. So the crisis is not just nationwide, it's not just in our state, it is right here in our county. Now, I'm about to show you statistics data from the Department of Corrections. And this is as of June 30th of 2022. When we highlight the numbers and you look at the numbers, the mistake I don't want you to make is to believe that's all the crime there is. This is Department of Corrections data showing the number of people who've committed the most serious of crimes. And instead of being put on probation, they've been incarcerated. And the reason I'm showing you this is twofold. One, to show kind of a bulge that has occurred a few years back, and we're now kind of coming off the worst of it and descending a little bit. And the other is to talk about how many of these crimes, even though they're broken into separate categories, how many of these crimes are driven by drug addiction. So, like I said, don't pay too much attention to the numbers, but we can see, you can start out with, the abduction, arson. You might not think arson would be a crime that's induced by drugs. Those of you who live in Shepherdstown know full well that we had a local business burned out because an employee decided that wanted to steal money from a safe and cover the tracks and set the building on fire. So Christian Cane is still not back to its former location. Yes.
I have a question. How many of these crimes are directly related to drug use?
Well, so the question is, how many of these crimes are directly related to drug use? I do not have empirical data to say in every case in West Virginia which crime was motivated by drugs. As we get scrolled down in this list, we will see specific drug crimes. But what I suggest to you is that most of these crimes, in fact, I'd estimate 95% of my criminal docket, most of those crimes have drugs as a factor, either drug-seeking behavior, which means they want to get money, or other behaviors that are motivated by drugs. They could be DUIs on the road, where someone's seriously hurt or killed. They could be armed robberies, burglaries, where someone breaks into the house. Many of these crimes are directly motivated by drugs.
Are they motivated by drugs or by alcohol, or somebody has a mental illness and drugs just make it worse?
Thank you for asking that question. Thank you. The question is, are they motivated by alcohol, by drugs, or mental illness? To draw the bright line between mental health issues and drug issues is an impossible task, because many times we see people that have mental health issues also have addiction issues, and vice versa. That goes both ways. Now, with regard to alcohol versus drugs, the only difference between alcohol and illegal drugs is alcohol is legal. That's it, folks. And if you want to talk about an addictive substance that has a massive toll on our society, and incidentally is one of the harder drugs to beat the addiction to, it's alcohol. So thank you for raising that point. All right, so as we scroll through, here you see the drug and narcotic offenses, and you can see in the totals in the bottom drug narcotic offense totals, you can see that kind of bulge we were talking about, where in 2015 there were 790, a few years later 966, now down to 675. Things are starting to work. That's as big as I can make it, I'm sorry. So things are starting to work. These are the offenses for which someone, we can say for sure, is incarcerated because of the violation of law, the drug violation of law. Now, as you think about this issue, I also want you to remember many offenders are given probation and drug treatment, but these are the offenders who are sent to prison. So again, my main point on showing you this, including the DUIs and all that, is just to give you a sense as we talk about it, as to how many crimes actually have drugs at their heart. So you see the larceny crimes, you see the other crimes, even the homicide crimes. Frequently, someone has co-occurring mental health issues, drug and alcohol issues. So this chart is from the West Virginia Department of Corrections, and it shows you in graph form, bar graph form, fiscal year 2014 to fiscal year 2022, how many different offenses of different types are committed for which someone is sentenced. These are sentenced offenders put in prison, in other words. Again, to make this point, I haven't made it already enough, is that as you look at these crimes, most of them, the breaking and entering, many of the sex offenses, the drug narcotic offenses in gray, the homicide offenses, and the other offenses, those are all motivated by drugs. So in reality, you could probably take these 5 different bars for each year and stack them on top of one another and say about 95% of those are caused directly by substance use disorders. So we've talked a little bit about one aspect of the human dimension of drug addiction, and that is the deaths and the incarceration. Let's talk a little bit about the money for a moment, because the money matters too. Every time we divert money into prison system, we don't use those same dollars for our schools, for our teachers, for our roads, for our parks, all the things we would really love to use our tax dollars for. They have to be diverted into the prison system. So here's an example, and you can see this. The average cost per year in West Virginia last year of putting someone in the penitentiary, $38,099. That is more than the cost of room and board at WVU, Marshall, or Shepherd. Think about that. We're paying more to have someone in prison than we would if we just paid for their education outright. And it doesn't end there, because the human toll gets worse. Remember, with every crime that's committed, there's the obvious victim. You have your house broken into, you suffer the trauma of losing that security of your home. You have your possessions taken, you suffer that. There's the obvious victim. There's your family members, your friends who hear about the crime to you. They suffer as well because they internalize that harm to their friend and they worry about it. They think, it's bad. It's bad out there. You better take action because things could happen. Then there are the less obvious victims. And I suggest to you, one of the less obvious victims that people don't think about are the family members of the person who committed the criminal act. They're also harmed. They lose a loved one. They have, often, there are children involved. They lose their parent. Their parent's gone for a long time. That stresses them. That makes them more inclined to commit crimes, more inclined towards juvenile delinquency. It interferes with their well-being. So if we look at the cost per juvenile, remember, the juveniles have to be housed in special facilities that are isolated by sight and sound from any adult prisoner. They require additional care, education. It's a whole different ballgame, frankly. The cost per juvenile per year last year in West Virginia is $185,350 per juvenile. 1 year. We could have paid private school and private tuition from here to Kingdom Come with that amount of money. So stopping juveniles from becoming addicted to substances, addressing their mental health issues, it's worth it.
Question. How much do they have access to computers when they're in that setting?
Okay, so the question is, how much access do juveniles have to computers when they're in a residential living facility? And I don't actually know the exact answer to that. I think some of it probably depends on why they're in the facility in the first place. There are some juveniles who commit very serious crimes, and I expect they have limited access. There are others who, because of their repeated behavior, but not so terrible.
Some know how to use it illicitly.
I would almost argue that they have access to it, since if you've been in a middle school, high school, even elementary school, everything's electronic. They don't have textbooks anymore. Everything is online electronics, but they probably have it. It's just the time on it. Hopefully limited automatic.
We would hope their use is controlled. That certainly would go into employee salary, personnel services, payroll category, because you have to monitor, you have to have counselors, you have to have educators, you have to have nurses and doctors. There's a whole plethora of different professions that you need to provide. It's critical to provide to a student or a young person who's in one of these juvenile detention facilities, if for no other reason, even if you're not a humanitarian, if for no other reason than $185,000 a year. Let's talk about another aspect of the human dimension of substance use disorder. And that is the direct effect on the children in the home. When parents are abuseful or neglectful of their children, including by having illegal substances in the house that are accessible to children, and children do die from putting their finger into fentanyl, heroin-laced fentanyl or fentanyl-laced heroin, they are removed from the home by the West Virginia Department of Health and Human Resources. They need to be placed in some type of foster care. Kinship care being the preferred method, but if not kinship, other foster parents, there's even out-of-state facilities sometimes. And so currently in West Virginia, as of January 12th, and you can go to the child welfare dashboard of the DHHR to see this, it's updated every month. As of the last report, January 12th, 2023, 6,151 kids are in foster care. Now, folks, there are some great foster care parents out there who oftentimes end up adopting the child, and we are blessed to have them taking care of these children, truly. I have one family in Jefferson County, I think they've adopted their 8th child through foster care. And so they are truly trying to do the best they can. But on the whole, foster care is not the best option for a child. On the whole, the best option is a safe, healthy household with parents present, not using illegal substances or addicted to alcohol. That is the best. And so when you see this many children in foster care, this is actually down from its peak, but when you see this many children in foster care, you know some percentage of these children are going to end up in the institutional setting. They're going to grow into adults, age out of the juvenile care setting, not go to school, have the mental health issues, commit more crimes, perhaps repeat their parents' or even now their grandparents' mistakes and become addicted to drugs and alcohol. So this is kind of just a ball of problems for the future unless we address it very seriously. Now, if you say, well, Dave, you're just talking about across the state of West Virginia, Jefferson County, Eastern Panhandle, we're much better off. I wish it were so. Here are the numbers for the Eastern Panhandle. And as of January 12th, 61, and that's Jefferson, Berkeley, and Morgan County. And if you take it a step farther, we can drill down. I'm sorry, that's just Jefferson County. Jefferson County, we currently have 61 children in foster care. So you can see this is a very real problem right here, right now. And when these children are in foster care, as far as the courts are concerned, we're having regular multidisciplinary team meetings with the care providers, with the treatment providers, with the court system, trying to make sure these kids are taken care of. Okay, so let's turn a little bit more into the issue now of what is substance abuse. And this is from the Dictionary of Psychology. It is a pattern of recurrent, significant social, occupational, legal, or interpersonal adverse consequences caused pretty typically, well, there are more different types of drugs now, but pretty typically by one of these 9 drug classes associated with abuse. These are alphabetical, but alcohol deserves to be up at the top of the list. It's a common problem. Amphetamines, that's the speed we hear about. Cannabis, cocaine, hallucinogens, inhalants, opioids, phenylcyclidines, that's the PCP, angel dust, sedatives, hypnotics, or I don't know how to say this, I have Dr. Didden here, he'll help me. Anxiolytics, is it that? Those are like the benzo,
Exactly.
benzo, help with that.
Benzodiazepine.
There we go, thank you.
Valium.
That, yes, sedative. We know benzo, we pretty typically say it's just benzo because that's what it's known as on the street. It's a Schedule III drug. It's actually lower down on the list of punishments for drugs. But it has remarkably bad effects. It's highly addictive, and when taken in excess, has remarkably bad effects where people are still mobile, but they lose scienter, they lose knowledge of what they're doing. And so we'll see people who've committed atrocious crimes, up to murder, up to and including murder, and they will say, and you believe them, they have absolutely no recollection of doing it. They had taken so many benzos, they just don't even know what they were doing. So that's the definition of abuse, and you can see that tied back to the West Virginia legislation, talking about how we want to improve productivity and educational attainment, workforce reliability. That's affected directly by substance abuse.
I like that, but it's obviously nicotine is the worst.
So nicotine,
I didn't have a single patient on heroin who didn't start as addictive behavior on nicotine, not one. And I didn't have hardly anyone that had stopped the nicotine in the meantime. So
So-
all smoking when I talk.
So the point that the doctor's making is that nicotine is also one of the most common drugs. Whether it's a so-called gateway drug to other drugs, I don't know, that might be a step too far. In treatment court, we feel like we have enough trouble. And so while I will encourage people to quit smoking, for one, if you're homeless and can't afford food, it's expensive. Cigarettes are expensive. So I'll just, even on a practical economic grounds, I'll encourage it. And I always joke with people that it'll stunt their growth and all that, but, it's one of those drugs that has severe health consequences over the long term. It's very difficult to quit. And you're right. Almost all the people you see who have other addictions, cigarettes are in there somewhere. I can't say cause and effect. I could probably point out and say most of these people drank milk as children, therefore that's the cause of it. I don't think that's true, but nonetheless, there's a correlation between the two. And maybe we go off topic here for a moment. Maybe there's a reason for the correlation. No one's asked yet, but my personal theory on why we have such an addiction problem is that it comes down to isolation. Not necessarily physical isolation, it's psychological isolation. And you see that in children that have suffered abuse, particularly the sexual abuse. There's been general oral contact with a parent or care provider. They feel like that is a terrible secret that they don't want to reveal to anyone. That causes them as a child, as a teen, to be separate and apart from their peers. They feel isolated. If they're having trouble at home, they're homeless, which so many are. That makes them feel separate and apart. And the more isolated someone feels, the more likely they are, I think, to go to the people, places, and things that give them some happiness, some drugs, typically is what it is. And so, and I'm jumping way ahead from what we're doing, but one of our strategies is to try and rebuild connectivity for people so that they are connected to their community, so that they have contacts they can reach out to if they start feeling the urge to use. There's someone they can pick up the phone and call so that they can get some help. And I feel we're more successful when we eliminate isolation and reconnect, and maybe first time connect the person back into a community of other caring people who reinforce the idea that this person matters. People care about them. They're important to us. If you feel you're not important, no one cares, it doesn't matter. You'll do almost anything. That's my personal theory. I don't know if people disagree or agree, but that's, thank you, Doctor. Okay, so let's talk for a moment about substance dependence. So you're using substances, and this is important to understand. It is a cluster of cognitive, behavioral, and physiological symptoms from which you develop tolerance, you'll have withdrawal symptoms if you quit, and an uncontrollable drive to continue use. Let's dwell on this for a moment. I had the good fortune, thanks to the National Center for State Courts and the West Virginia Supreme Court, to participate in the better part of a year-long session where judges met with clinicians from WVU. So we got to meet with psychiatrists, it's all by Zoom, but we got to meet with psychiatrists, neurologists, other health professionals to help explain to the judges the mechanism, what happens with addiction. And here's what I learned, and here's how I learned it. We had the benefit of seeing brain imageries, scans done of people's brains. Healthy brains, non-addicted, people who had substance use disorder were addicted to substances. And what we learned, particularly with the opioid addictions, is that the addiction changes the physical structure of the person's brain. You can actually see the change in their brain on the imagery. And what they do is they provide stimuli, which to a healthy person, if you see a picture of children playing, well, most people's brains light up in a certain area. They say, oh, that's great. You see an act of charity, you think that's good. For the people who have substance use disorders, their brains did not light up to the normal stimuli. They had almost no response to the normal stimuli. What did they have a response to? Anyone? Drugs. If you showed them images of drugs, brain lit up. So the drug use itself changed the structure of their brain. How long does it take for the structure to change back? Of course, we can't open people's heads and see. We have to do more imaging studies. But depending upon the particular drug, fentanyl versus heroin versus cocaine, depending on the particular drug, it would take somewhere between 14 and 18 months of abstinence for the brain to start to heal back so that normal stimuli work. So part of our program is actually designed around that time frame. We're providing, on the one hand, cognitive therapy, behavioral therapy, and on the other hand, we're trying to buy time, particularly for the opioids. Now, when we're going through those 9 classes of drugs, some of the drugs are really, really bad. And so the meth group of drugs, the evidence is dismal. It also changes the structure of the brain. And the evidence of brain healing is very weak. So if someone's addicted to meth, we may actually lose that person. They may never be fully functioning again. That may be too far to go. So that's scary. Now, you will hear people say, drug addicts cause their own problems, and we should not spend money on people who cause their own problems. And indeed, we do have to hold people accountable for their behavior, no question about that. But ask yourself, do we fail? Do we refuse medical services for people who cause their own problems? If the person eats too many meals at the fast food restaurant, do we say, sorry, that heart disease you have, it's your fault, no treatment for you? If you suffer from diabetes, do we say, that's really your fault? If you live in Shepherdstown and drink the water, which we're now getting as water board member here. Drink the water every day. But so the idea that we should withhold medical care for people who have some role in their own trouble is a specious argument. Now, when we say uncontrollable drive, it's easy to gloss over those words and say, oh, uncontrollable drive. Yeah. We all know uncontrollable drive. Well, I've heard it described this way. Imagine someone holding your arms behind your back, taking the back of your head and pushing it into a tank full of water. And your head face down in the water now. What do you most want to do on earth at that moment? Is it read the new novel or new history novel about Mr. Pope, President Pope? Nope, it's not that. You want air, you want to breathe. That is an uncontrollable urge. That will give you a sense of how strong this compunction is. Now, the withdrawal symptoms that people experience, let's not, some of us might say, oh, you know, I'll go out and run a marathon. That's pain. I can do that. You know, I'll sit on a hard bicycle seat for miles. That's pain. I'll do that. So withdrawal symptoms, suck it up, buttercup. You know, you suffer those symptoms. The symptoms can not only be severe, symptoms can be fatal. So again, when you're talking about how severe this problem is and how difficult it is to stop, brain structure changes, uncontrollable urges, and the person knows when they try and quit, they may suffer withdrawal symptoms that are extraordinarily painful to go through. So you combine those two, substance abuse and substance dependence, and the term we use is substance use disorder. Now, you've heard me use the term addiction here a number of times, and every time I do that, it irks me, and I try not to do it in my treatment court, even though the statute calls it the drug court. It's a term that stigmatizes. And remember the isolation theory? We don't want to stigmatize people, because to stigmatize them is to isolate them and put them apart. And substance use disorder is an acknowledgement that this is a medical condition. It is actually a medical diagnosis. So when we're talking about it, you can correct me, yell it out if I say addiction, it's substance use disorder, that's the correct term. All right, I'm sorry about how the slide looks. I don't know why it came out that way, but this is the download from the National Association of Drug Court Professionals. And this is an organization that was started back in 1989 when a judge in Florida realized we're not going to incarcerate our way out of the drug problem. And we need another route. And what was developed and is now the gold standard over the last 35 years is basically treatment courts. And we have standards for how they should operate. Let's go through a few of those. Standard one is the target population. The question is, who will most benefit from this type of intervention? We need people in treatment court, and ones we can do the most good for are those who are addicted to intoxicating drugs or alcohol and at substantial risk for reoffending and have struggled with less intensive interventions or treatment programs. And we assess these people not on subjective criteria. There's actually objective testing that our probation officers and mental health professionals, like we have some people from Jefferson Davenport, that do objective testing to establish whether someone is an appropriate person for this type of therapy. Standard number two is equity and inclusion. It's critically important that we don't exclude people, whether because of outright bias or, as we know happens even in the justice system, because of implicit bias. We need to be very, very conscientious and careful to make sure that we provide treatment to all who need that treatment. Treatment court requires at standard three the role of a judge in there. And so I meet with our drug court people, treatment court, every week. And it's important. And you can see a little stat on the side there that if a drug court judge spends at least 3 minutes with each participant, it'll produce 153% greater reductions in recidivism. Why is that? One, we're showing we care. We're providing incentives for people who are doing well. We're congratulating them. They get the adulation of their peers and of the court. On the other hand, there is the disappointment that I will express if you don't live up to the number one obligation of someone in treatment court. Anyone want to hazard guess what the number one obligation is? What is it? Sobriety, staying clean. 0 for 2. Anyone else?
Show up,
Show up is important. Of course, we have a strong penalty for that if you don't show up.
being honest.
Who said it? That's the answer. That's the number one thing I need. If you can be honest with us, if you can say, yeah, Judge, last week I messed up. I just felt the urge. Then we will talk about what were the triggers that caused you to feel that urge? What tools did you use to try and deal with it when it came? Did you pick up your phone and call your contact list of coaches and friends and people who can help you? Did you call the probation officer and tell the probation officer, I'm really having a crisis, I need help? We will work to change behaviors, change people, places, and things, so that the person can find a strategy that works for them to beat the drugs. But if you can't be honest with me, if you can't be honest about your substance use disorder, how much I can do that?
How can you tell?
Well, that's a great question. And so we're going to get to that in just a moment, but I will jump ahead because of the question. The question is, how can you tell if they're not being honest? And no, I can't just look at somebody and, I mean, I may want to pretend that I can stare at John and try and pretend that I can tell if someone's telling the truth or not. Really can't. People who use drugs, have substance use disorder, are often very, very schooled at deception. They've done it for a long time. So we have a different method. It's called drug testing. And so they are subject to repeat, random, frequent drug testing. In fact, in phase one, your first 4 months in the program, you're probably tested several times per week. I would like to tell you that the drug testing is perfect, that we detect any illegal drug. The people who are drug manufacturers, criminals doing it, they change the formulas for the drugs. Sometimes our contract for the drug testing lab doesn't test for the drug we want. And we have additional drug court funds, treatment court funds to have something that's tested for. Recently, we had an outbreak of the type of boot that was being used by people, and it evaded our first round of tests. And when we became suspicious, we used a different type of test and caught the boot. So accountability, which is one of the statutory purposes, and that's through drug testing. And we've had people in treatment court say, I've messed up, and this is what I did. And I will not throw you out of treatment court if you tell me that. I will not put you in prison if you tell me that. We will work with you, work with our health provider to come up with a better strategy for you.
I have a question.
Yes.
So. I guess right before COVID hit. My friend, part of your drug court, Jackie Robinson,
Sure. Jackie graduated from treatment court.
died 2 days later of overdose.
It was a little longer, but yes.
3 days.
Yeah.
I'm the one who found him.
I'm sorry. I'm very sorry. Jackie was a good friend and so,
He evidently had gotten through a majority of your program, and there towards the end. Right before he graduated, he was talking about, I don't know, I'm kind of nervous, I'm going back to Florida, this, that, and the other. And I was like, well, have you talked to Crystal? Have you talked to him? And he's like, oh, no, they're not extending me anymore. How do you keep the fear of repercussions from being honest? Because I'm sure had he told either of you right before he had thoughts of using, he wouldn't have graduated.
well, first, let me say this, I'm very sorry. And if I talk too much about people who have died in the program, you'll have tears up here. Jackie was a great participant. Jackie was a smart man. Jackie was also a drug dealer. And he was a user of drugs, and he made it through the program very well. He really tried hard. He was at that perfect point when we like to get someone to treatment court where they want to change their lives. Because if you come into treatment court and you just don't want to go to prison, and you're saying, well, why not? Why not just do treatment court? I don't have to go to prison. You'll fail out of treatment. We need people who want to change their lives. Because the truth is, no matter how persuasive I think I am, how hard Crystal, my probation officer, works how hard the other members of the treatment team were, the care providers were. If someone's really not interested in changing themselves,
But I don't think that was.
that was not the case with Jackie. My theory, of course, I don't know this, and I haven't talked to his mom. My theory with Jackie is it was COVID. It was the start of the isolation, and that isolation hit him hard. And he started to feel alone, and he didn't use his tools. And here's the sad truth. We keep people off of drugs. Jackie's case, I think for probably 16 months or so, he was clean. By the time he graduated. We keep people off of drugs for that long. And their tolerance, remember that one physiological response, tolerance, their tolerance level drops down. And so if they reuse, and they reuse in the quantities that they used previously, or as happens all the time, the drugs themselves have changed. They die.
What measures do you have to help those? I'm a firm believer, maybe had Jackie been allowed to be on buprenorphine when he relapsed, A, he wouldn't have felt it, and B, I wouldn't have had gone dead.
Okay, so you bring up several good questions, good points. Number one, what changes could we make? We have made a change, actually. Since the time of Jackie's passing, we now have an aftercare segment to treatment court. You've graduated, you've received the accolade of having completed the program, but now we have aftercare. And we continue to provide services. Really, we'll provide services as long as you want them. We will provide services forever. Laura Creamer's on the line right now. She and others busted their what's to provide services for as long as someone wants service. So he would have had that available had he been a little bit later in the program. Buprenorphine, that's medication-assisted treatment. That is, I'm going to talk about in a moment, that is one of the gold standards of treatment, is receiving medication. You can take Suboxone, you can take Bupe, as they call it, you can take Vivitrol, and we have some experts here, so we have other drugs that we can even talk about. But there are a host of drugs. The Vivitrol you can get monthly as a shot, and I think it's still covered. Is it still covered by Medicaid? Oh yeah, so Vivitrol is still covered by Medicaid, and you can get that shot for the rest of your life. And for those who don't know, we have several doctors here, but for those who don't know, these are drugs that are what they call agonists or partial agonists. And what they do is they essentially block some or all the receptors in a person's brain that gets pleasure when they use certain types of drugs. And so they're beneficial to reduce the urge for someone to use the drugs. And so it was not our program, it is not the program to stop someone from using medication-assisted treatment. Just like I talked about a few moments ago, some people who say we shouldn't provide treatment to people who deliberately cause their own trouble. People who say the use of a medication-assisted treatment is just substituting one drug for another, we really have it wrong. If someone needs medication-assisted treatment and it allows them to be productive, to not be involved in criminal activity, to take care of their family, for goodness sake, yes, yes. Why would you want someone in prison at $38,000 a year when they could get 12 shots a year and not use the drugs? So yes, I hope I answered your question again. Jackie's a painful memory for all of us. Yes.
Who makes the decision about what medically assisted treatment?
That's a good question. So the question is, who makes the decision about what's medically necessary for the person? I'll tell you first, who doesn't make the decision? Me. I am not a doctor. Okay, I am not. And so no member of our treatment team who's not a doctor or having the credentials to make the decision makes this decision. The process begins with the intake, where the person is evaluated by a medical professional to come up with a plan for what the course of treatment should be. That plan typically includes some psychological elements, some specific programming, such as reducing criminality and training against using violence. Depends on the person's needs. We have all sorts of programs. And then if it's medically determined that the person needs to be on medication assisted treatment, that's a doctor's call. And so they will be on that treatment until the doctor says otherwise. I will never, and no treatment court judge does to my knowledge, interfere with the decision of the medical professional on medical treatment.
I like the listing of the medication assisted treatments, that's good. There's, when I was working in the methadone clinic in Martinsburg, the only ones were incumbent. So the real reason who determines what drug to get is which clinic to take, and which clinic is in the area, and which clinic you can drive to when you don't have a car or a driver's license. The real reason is much more complicated than what's best for the patient.
Yes, and so the point being made is that there are some geographic and other factors that may dictate treatment where methadone may or may not be available in certain areas. It may be the preferred choice of certain providers. All true. If the point is that there are gaps in our system, there are places we can improve our system, 100% agree. There are gaps in places to improve. The gold standard is evaluation by a psychiatrist, psychologist, or other professional qualified to make the decision and make the recommendation. And the gold standard is that treatment court non-medical people will never interfere with that decision. In fact, it's not even a point of criticism to say that you're using Vivitrol. Indeed, I'll even encourage people, if they're having trouble, to think about alternatives. One of the frequent problems, again, I'm going off track, but one of the frequent problems with Suboxone is it's subject to diversion. You know, people will sell the strips, they'll get them into the jail.
Okay, so on that note, Dave knows where I'm going with this. I spoke at the White House about the removal of the ex-labor. DEA was there. She specifically stated regarding buprenorphine that even when buprenorphine isn't typically used, and even when it's diverted for its intended purpose.
Yeah.
So, I mean, the diversion of bub is mainly to help people off of the opiates in the first place, be it in jail or what have you. I mean, no, in jail, they need to go to the doctor. That's obvious, but some people, like you said, their brain changed. They're not that. They're all the time that.
If I took my robe off, my pretend robe I'm not wearing right now, if I took my pretend judicial robe off and just talked to you about that, I would probably tend to agree with you. Unfortunately, diversion of drugs entails other behaviors that are unlawful. And so even if you have a prescription for a drug and you lawfully have it in your possession, if you sell or transfer it to another person, that's an unlawful act. And so putting my robe back on, in treatment court, we cannot tolerate diversion. And so we have counts on how many strips you receive, Suboxone strips. You know, are you using them at the appropriate intervals? Are you diverting them? It's all part of accountability. All right, so we've talked about the judge. Let's talk about standard 4. I'll highlight this for you. Incentive sanctions and therapeutic adjustments. What are the tools we have available in court? Why court? Well, number one, we want to use incentives to encourage people. This is again part of reconnecting everyone back into the community. The psychological research on incentives basically comes down to around 3 incentives or 4 incentives, somewhere in that neighborhood, for every penalty. So we've developed all sorts of incentives. And so, for example, each week we consider who's complied with their treatment program that week. If you have, your name goes into a hat, get your name drawn out when we go into treatment court, and you get congratulations for having your name on the list in the first place. And if your name gets picked out of the hat, you get to leave my presence early, which always people seem to like. Don't know why. You get to leave early, and it's a little reward right there. We have other incentives. We will use some of the funds that we raise, some of the funds that they pay for participation in treatment court, to allow them to do certain activities when they earn that, so they can do something. They can do something as a family. We are always looking for ways to provide incentive to a person. On the flip side, if you cannot comply, then we have to use disincentives. Disincentives run the gamut from a frown or rebuke, very painful, I'm sure, You get that from me. To maybe your other members of your group are kind of like put out by you because they're all in each other's business every week and they're put out by you. To worse. So we used to call it community service, which grated me. So we no longer call it community service because to me, community service is a pleasure, a right, something you get to do if you earn it. So I've adopted the very harsh term of you get forced labor. And so you get forced to go clean the sheriff's cars and wash the cars, which is not actually that bad. You go over to the animal shelter and you clean pens or something of that sort. Something just to emphasize that we're very disappointed in what you're doing. If you make the treatment team and me really disappointed, then we use incarceration. And sanctions for incarceration work best, believe it or not, long or short, what do people think? Long sanction works best or short sanction? Short sanction works way better. It disrupts their life, pulls them out. They have to go through being back in jail. They hate that. That works well. If you put someone in for a long time, even 30 days, they begin to acclimate to their environment and it no longer feels like such a sanction. So a 2-3 day hit, that's actually the best length of sanction. If you really can't comport with what you're supposed to do, the ultimate is you get terminated from treatment, get back into the criminal justice system, and you'll likely have your sentence imposed. Standard 5 is substance use disorder treatment. Whether you go to the Jefferson Day report or you go to Full Circle Healing, you get a bunch of counseling and psychosocial therapies to try and reduce criminality, to try and understand what's bothering you and why. And these are carefully tailored both for individual therapy and for group therapy. And regular attendance and compliance and progress is necessary. We have other complementary treatment and social services. For example, I've learned over the past 4 years of being the treatment court judge that many of our participants did not grow up the way most of us did. They didn't have 2 parents, they didn't have a stable house, they don't know anything about how to open a bank account, balance a checkbook, they don't have even the basic information. And so we've started now with people where we detect this as an issue, is we start with make your bed. You know, get up in the morning, make your bed, have a diary, keep a plan, a calendar for what you have to do that day. You have to go for a job interview, you need to have clean clothes, you need to have transportation arranged. And we try and build up in the person some rigor, some scheduling, so that it becomes inculcated into them and they're able to continue on when they leave the program. But City National Bank, for instance, has a program where you can open up a checking account and it's a kind of account that won't bounce, so that they don't get a bunch of fees and they can start learning how to bank and how to participate in the system. And we have other service providers that do the same thing. We talked a few minutes ago about standard 7, which is the drug and alcohol testing. Very frequent in the first phase, the first 4 months, as they go to phase 2, which is usually another 4 months or so, phase 3, another 4 months or so, and then phase 4, much less frequent, but still random. It still is part of the accountability. People are very adept, if they want to be, at trying to avoid drug testing. I didn't do a slide of it, but if you go onto your Amazon device, or on your phone, on your device, and go to Amazon and look up diversion devices, there's listing after listing of items and ways to hide your drugs. You know, fake key fobs, I think I saw a fake can of corn, so that if my probation officer comes to the house to inspect, there's just a can of corn sitting there, fake water bottles, all sorts of fake things to hide drugs. And these are sold legally. Some of the worst ones are devices that store urine. So you can get someone's clean urine. And if you're called upon to produce urine for a drug test, then you have that supply of a reservoir of urine on you, and you try and use that, which forces our probation officers to measure the temperature of the urine, which then they try and keep against the body to keep it at the right temperature. And of course, the young man has to explain why he appears to be pregnant. Yes.
You go back to standard, what was it, 6, it mentions, talks about naloxone.
Yes.
That's very specific. It teaches people how to manage it, but can you make a broader statement about the importance of naloxone and maybe, I want to ask you, why is it so difficult to get it into the hands of just all of us here?
So you've just completely taken away my big finish. Don't mind holding, we'll come to that as my big finish, because otherwise I have nothing to finish.
Jan, I have some more. Yeah.
Let's talk for a moment about the multidisciplinary team. This may surprise some of you, because probably a lot of you think, well, courthouse, there's nothing for the public there, nothing you want to be involved in. Ray kind of joked about that, he hasn't been to the courthouse. I'll tell him that we do adoptions, so if he wants to adopt her. But there are fun things. Multidisciplinary team are people from different walks of life. We do want to assure due process to our participants. We always have at least one assistant prosecuting attorney who's present in treatment court, and we have a defense counsel. And you may think to yourself, oh, I bet you that's some arguments in there. Actually, the funny thing is, often the defense counsel, lock them up, that's it. And the prosecutor says, I just want to work with them a little bit more. It's like Stockholm syndrome for this. They switch sides on issues. We have someone from law enforcement who's present. They're present for various reasons, but they have a perspective. We have our probation officer who plays a critical role in the treatment team. We have other members, Laura Storm, now Laura Kramer, she's on the line. She's our circuit clerk, and she's participated in treatment court since day one in Jefferson County, and to this day comes every Monday and sits with us and participates. We have other service providers there. We have someone from the schools, which is vitally important because, as I mentioned, many of these people haven't finished school. They don't have that basic qualification that we have. They haven't finished high school. So we provide counseling and training, and I've offered to provide remedial algebra. I think I'm coming up for one of my participants. We're going to learn how to parallel park a car. And so I'll be out at the driving center, and we'll try to teach him to park between the cones. So we try and teach basic skills. Each person on the team has a perspective and has a vote. And I conduct my treatment court not by fiat for the most part, but rather by consensus. And believe it or not, most times it's unanimous. We give people a lot of chances, and by the time they get incarcerated or thrown out of the program, it's pretty much unanimous that they have to go. Any questions on the National Association for Drug Court Professionals and the gold standard?
Dave, back to your incentives, are any treatment courts in West Virginia using contingency management now? They might be getting it through their counseling, but it's a structured everything that we're talking about with the raffle, and it provides people, for example, gift cards for achieving certain levels, certain goals.
We do use gift cards. We have used that in the past. There's been some issues with accountability and the state auditor on what the money is used for and how many gift cards. We have done that. Right now, we more frequently go to local businesses and ask for donations. And so Procter & Gamble, for instance, has been a huge donor of the whole range of its products. So we have a closet full of Procter & Gamble, detergents and diapers and shampoos and all the stuff they make. And if someone's doing well and they build up enough points, they get to go back to the closet and pick whatever they want. So yeah, that's one of the incentives that we use. And we're always looking for others as well. So if someone has incentives they want to hand out, we will take that. Okay, standard 9 is census and caseloads. We try and limit the number of participants. We really, because it's so intensive, once we get to 20 participants, I think the standard for our probation officers is actually 15. We've got as high as 22, which has been tough on Crystal, probation officer. But we try and keep it down 10 to 20. I think right now we're probably running 11 to 12 people. We're always open to taking more, but they're in there for a long time. So we do try and keep track of how many. We have very good cooperation with Berkeley County's treatment court, Judge Lawrenson. And so if someone lives over in Berkeley County, maybe they committed their offense in Jefferson, but they live in Berkeley, we'll transfer someone over to Berkeley and they'll take them. So we do whatever we can to help. We haven't gotten that overburdened too much. All right, so the final standard is monitoring and evaluation. We'll talk more about this in a few moments. But we do monitor. We have regular reviews, we have outside reviews, statistics are collected, and we do have statistics, which I'll show you in a few moments. Now, a word of caution, not everyone is even eligible for treatment court despite their substance use disorder. You can have substance use disorder, but still be disqualified. And I'm sorry for that, but it is state code, and it's actually important. If your underlying offense is a crime of violence, you've beaten somebody, you've used a gun, you've done something violent, we cannot take you into the program. If your underlying offense is a crime that requires registration as a sex offender, whether it be for 10 years or for life, we cannot take you into the program. If you've committed a violent felony in another state, there are national databases we check. If you've committed a violent felony in another state, you're not eligible. And if you have to be a sex offense registrant in another state, we can't take it. There are a lot of reasons for it. There's safety of our other participants, and also safety of our probation officer. Our probation officer goes out to people's homes, and if we're dealing with someone who's violent, we're not willing to risk her life to send out there. So there are limitations as we complete the program. Yes.
What's been the gender balance of participants?
That's a really good question. The gender balance is by far and away male. And we do seek to remedy that. Part of the problem, part of the issue is young men are much more frequent offenders with drugs than young women are. There's women, don't get me wrong, they're there, but far more men than women are offenders. The other problem is, and I'm gonna go off my chart again, but off my track. The other problem is that women sadly present much more complex problems for treatment. And that's for one very straightforward reason. Almost every single woman who has substance use disorder has a history of either adverse childhood experiences where they've been molested, assaulted, all that, or they've suffered those same type of experiences as adults. And when they come into the program, their problems are so much more complex than just treatment work. We have to deal with all the sequelae, all the consequences of someone who can't trust, someone who's afraid, someone who can be incredibly deceptive. And they're a special class, a special case. We have special women's programs to try and help them. But by the time they get to the point of being high risk, high need, they have such a history. Those are the extraordinarily difficult cases. They are also some of our most important cases because almost invariably, they also have children. And so if your philosophy is utilitarian, how can we do the greatest good for the greatest number? Then you want to help those women who have children, because if we help the woman, we help the child. Now, West Virginia has just started a family treatment court program, which is designed to take into account both the needs of the drug offender, person with a substance use disorder, and also their family. It's really important. We don't have one in Jefferson County yet, because quite frankly, we don't have the manpower for it. We have 1.5 judges for 60,000 people in this county. And Judge McLaughlin runs the juvenile treatment court. I run the adult treatment court. We just don't have another judge do the family treatment court. But that's a really long way to answer your question. But any follow-up on that? Anyone? Okay. So if we have any accountants in the room, or maybe even if you're just one of those people, you always want the statistics. Tell me the numbers. What's your recidivism rate, Hammer? Does it work? Right? Okay, because we're spending money on it. And you've said we need to be careful spending money, so does it work? These are the stats. We'll get to them in a moment. This is just a map from the state showing where treatment courts are. And you can see that except for the white counties, the ones that are just have no color, there are treatment courts all across the state, and they're oftentimes regional. So this chart is from 2022. This is the most current chart we have. And it shows on the left-hand side the number of discharges statewide from treatment court. These are people who left treatment court. The number of pending cases for consideration, the number of referrals into treatment court, the number admitted, the number of denials. And you can see by far and away that graduation is 63% of the reason people leave treatment court. That's a pretty good stat for people who have to put up with intense supervision by a probation officer, weekly accountability, and having to come talk to a judge every week to explain what they've been doing and why. So that's really pretty good in terms of the rate of completion. This shows you ethnicity, gender, and race of participants. Obviously, it's a little bit loaded towards white participants because West Virginia, by far and away, has a dominantly white population. So it shouldn't be a surprise that we see a lot of white participants. But as I said earlier, we work very hard for anyone of color to get them into the program. We're acutely aware of that. We're also acutely aware of the special needs. I just want to divert for a minute away from the statistics. This caught my eye. This in the Journal of Pediatrics, December 10th, 2022. This is just published, and this is a study from West Virginia. And so when we're talking about reasons how people do in treatment court, well, if you look in West Virginia for the last year, we had 34,412 live births, 1 in 8 newborns, 12.2% had in utero exposure to opioid stimulants or cannabis. And you can see the consequences of that at birth, the number that are preterm, the number that have low birth weight, small for gestational age. Really startling. And we have doctors here, so I don't know why I have to answer this.
Does that include MOUD? Is that included in the 12.2?
Yes. So
Medication for opiate use disorders, so
Yes.
like people in recovery on buprenorphine, methadone, or what have you.
and the study actually does break out the number who are using those prescribed medications versus the ones that they shouldn't be using. But here's the interesting thing. Not only are you looking at 1 in 8, and I want you to hold that stat in your head for a moment. 1 in 8, 12% births are exposed to have in utero exposure to dangerous substances. But the consequences of these things, having low birth weight, being preterm, there's a host of consequences that befall children who start out with a disadvantage. Often they don't thrive. Often they're developmentally delayed. Often they need special services. It's not that they can't catch up, but we have to devote a lot of effort to help them catch up. Otherwise, you're creating the next generation of users, people incarcerated, public expense. We've got to intervene, right? We have to intervene in this. Yes, fine.
Is that also, is West Virginia also the highest?
The 1 in 8 step, I don't know that. I haven't seen a national study of this scope. it just caught my eye that 2 months ago, we had this study come out for West Virginia. Given that our rate is 81.3 per 100,000 of deaths, I'm gonna guess that we're on the upper end of the spectrum. On exposure.
We had the highest rate of neonatal abstinence syndrome that's diagnosed. Now, it's not entirely clear if that's because we report things so well. So this is from Project Watch, which is done, you know, through WVU, and my office of Maternal Child and Family Health. When I asked that question, because we were an outlier in NAF rates, I was told that in part is because we have this screening program and not all states are checking. So every birth does get screening for neonatal abstinence syndrome in West Virginia. It's interesting that the study that was done before this by the same group, maybe 7 or 8 years ago, showed they reported alcohol as well. And it's a huge issue. And it's actually the most common drug used in pregnancy. And that's the same devastating
The
effect.
Dr. Din is mentioning neonatal
Abstinence.
absence. And there's stats out there about the average cost to treat a child who's born early because of neonatal. You know, when they're born and there's opioids in the mother's blood or in the cord blood, the child is born addicted and the child has to go through withdrawal.
You can't be born addicted.
Well,
I'm sorry, they're born dependent. Thank you, sorry. I didn't mean to like creep on that one, but
Well, they
addictions
go
of
through-
behavior.
they go through withdrawal. You're right. They don't have the drug-seeking behavior. They can't. But
They're dependent.
they're dependent. That's the better term. They are dependent on the drugs
Sorry.
and they go through withdrawal as an infant, which is an incredible thing. On a cost perspective, I see different cost estimates. I think the last estimate I saw was average child who has to be in the neonatal care unit is about $54,000 to get that child through. So again, we're talking huge expense right from day one if we don't attack this problem. So treatment courts are actually having good success because here's the stat: with children born of women who are in treatment court or completing treatment court for the last year. This is 1 year. So no drugs present. That's the large blue area. That is 92.3%. Remember when I told you to keep that 12%, that 1 in 8 in mind for a moment? This is a 50% reduction. Use lots of numbers. 50% reduction in children born dependent upon drugs. That's a big deal as we go forward. That means you don't have that hospital bill for neonatal care. You don't have that delayed development, the reduced educational attainment, all the problems the legislature wants to address. That's a big improvement. This is another, to give you an indication of what the most common drugs are that we're dealing with. And you can see opiates and non-synthetic cannabinoid and methamphetamine at almost 30%. And that one is a really bad one. They're all bad, but the fentanyl and the heroin, just talk about that for a moment. We have a gigantic problem with fentanyl being in the heroin supply. In fact, it's not just in the heroin supply. So if you have a teenager, like I do, who might say to you, Dad, you know, cannabis is not a problem. It doesn't look at alcohol compared to cannabis. Well, on a hypothetical sense, that's true. But the reality is when you're talking about street drugs, everything from cannabis to heroin is tainted with fentanyl. The dealers are doing this so that people become addicted, want to use more. The unhappy, tragic side effect is fentanyl kills. Fentanyl is a great drug if you're a surgeon and you need to put someone under to do a surgery. They can put a patch on you or inject it into you, reduce pain, put you unconscious, do surgery. Beautiful drug. It is simple to manufacture. Very, very small quantities are deadly, and it is throughout our drug stream right now. So just a warning, if you talk to younger people who say, not dangerous, watch out. Employment and enrollment, that was a goal at the outset that I showed you of the legislature. So participants who gained new employment in the reporting period and participants who started school in the reporting period. Yeah.
I have a question about this. I know employers had been going to the legislature trying to tell them that they need some sort of statute to, but they currently were not hiring people at drug.
You're right about that.
And how does your graduates address their employer when they go to the employer?
Well, so the question is, how do either graduates, and I'll expand it to our participants, because Jefferson County is expensive and our participants don't have the luxury of not working. They need housing, they need food, so we work to get them employment early. Number one, of course, they need to be honest with their employer. But here's an unintended benefit of the shortage of labor that we have right now. Employers are rethinking who they'll hire. And I'll single out Apple Valley, for instance. They've been a wonderful partner. The lumber mill in Ransom, Universal Forest Products, another wonderful partner. And how they've rethought it is they've said, well, we need workers. Here's a potential work pool. They have substance use disorder. But who is your most monitored person we could hire? Someone off the street, someone in treatment court who has to answer every week and get drug tested. And guess what? Drug tested at the state's expense, not the employer's expense. So we have had actually a turnaround in employment opportunities for our treatment people. We have one person who's about to graduate. He's one of the people who's gone back to school. He's probably not at this because he probably did it the year before, but has become a certified welder and now a crane operator. He's making more money than your judges do. It's really a great story. He came off of his addiction. He's paying back his restitution and his court costs. And he was on disability, and now he's back in the workforce and doing a great job. And that's the kind of story that makes volunteering as a treatment court judge so worthwhile. So here's the big number. Everyone wants to know this. What's the recidivism rate? What's the recidivism rate? And so we, by statute, are required to consider 6 months after graduation, 1 year, 2 years, and 5 years after graduation. And if you wonder how on earth do you know this, it's because we have dedicated computer specialists in Charleston who run searches on the national and state databases, the NCIC, the III, and some other databases, and determine whether or not someone who graduated from treatment court is committed a recidivizable offense. And as you can see, at 6 months out, we're at 97.45% good at all the way out to the 5-year mark. We're still at 87.25%. If you go and look up recidivism rates for people who just go to prison and come out versus people who graduate from treatment court, it's a stark difference. People from treatment court are doing much better on the whole than people who just go to prison. That was one of the original goals of the National Association for Drug Court Professionals. It's proving true. All right, big finish. This quote at the top is Stephanie Bond, our head of probation services in the state. She has this on the footer of all her emails. I liked it, so I quoted it here. And probably because you don't have to be brilliant, rich, beautiful, or perfect. You just have to care. Probably because I fit in all those categories. But I do care. And so if you just care, you can make a difference. So what can you do? Well, if you're interested in incentives for treatment court, donations of food, products, services. If you are concerned about housing, and you should be, people in treatment court often have no jobs, no houses, no food. We're trying to support creation of housing in Jefferson County. Right now in Jefferson County, we have one certified housing option, and it's only for women. It's in Kearneysville, 6 women. That's it. That's all we got. We have room for 6 women. We have many more people who need housing. I don't know the answer to the housing issue. Community ministries is getting ready to have a big fundraiser in March. Support it. They're trying to, they have a big project in mind. They've acquired land near the racetrack, just in Ransom, it's accessible to the sidewalk, bus service. It's gonna be a facility for women and children so that people who have trouble have a place to go. A great opportunity. Thank employers who employ people in recovery. Universal Forest Products, thank you. You know, Apple Valley, thank you for employing people. If you're an employer, consider employing someone who has substance use disorder. It's a great public good, and you'll have a good worker. You'll have someone that they've graduated who understands honesty, who understands what they are and how to be honest with themselves. Great choice. Volunteer to be a foster parent if you have the ability. Please, we have so many children in need because of drug abuse. Being a foster parent is a great thing that you can do. The state gives a little bit of money to help out the expenses, but it's an incredibly rewarding position. Train to be a recovery coach. We have recovery coach programs. You don't tell people what to do, but you walk hand in hand with them and help them explore the choices that they can make and what opportunities are for them. So you're basically connecting with the community and helping the person get reconnected. Narcan. Narcan is like a miracle drug, okay? It can reverse the effects of an opioid overdose in seconds. And it used to be, and everyone's worried about this, you know, jab a needle in them and do something, and we're all scared about jabbing a needle in someone. Now it's administered as an inhalant. It's just a little tiny container. You can carry it with you. A little squeeze on the plunger in someone's nose, stand back, and voila. They will come out of they're usually unconscious, so they'll regain consciousness. It's free. The training takes 5 minutes. 5 minutes. That's all it takes. So do it. I mean, we have people who overdose in the bathrooms of the public library, people who overdose on the campus here. You can save someone's life. It's very, very important that we all know how to administer Narcan and that we know where we can find Narcan. Yeah.
Is it harmful if somebody is not OD, like?
My understanding from my training is it is not harmful. It is not harmful to a woman who's pregnant. You can even administer it to a pet. For example, if you have a pet that sniffs, someone's throwing heroin fentanyl on the ground and the dog sniffs it, they have incredibly sensitive receptors. You can even administer it to a pet with no adverse effect.
We used to tell people that the only known side effect of Narcan is they start breathing again.
That's right. They live. That's the side effect. They live. Now, they may do it again. And there are plenty of instances where they do it again. And don't do it. These are people. These are our brothers, our sisters, our parents, our children, our friends, our neighbors. Don't do that. And that's my last point, is be a friend. So I think we have a mic for questions, or we can just keep doing it the way we're doing it, where you just raise your hand and I'll repeat it. We had one in the back first, I think.
Someone asked a question, where do you get Narcan training?
Okay, so Jefferson County Emergency Services has regular training that they'll offer. There are probably other places that have it as well. You make a request, they'll come out and do the training.
Thank you.
Narcan years ago from the day report. Maybe she knows, maybe she hasn't. It's been sitting in my trunk for 3 years now. How long is it good?
So you should, you should get a new one. You should have a freeze. Freezing is not beneficial to the drug. And so getting a new one, they're free, they're cheap. We have several at work in the courtroom. So.
Expired Narcan is better than no Narcan.
Well, just to follow up on the Narcan, I mean, it's much more available now,
Yes.
but yet, people don't know about it. And you do have to, I mean, as far as I know, you have to have that training, and when I do it, that people have to fill out a form and stuff like that. I mean, I don't understand why it's just not out there like condoms.
Oh, they're handy. I don't know about condoms, not the business. The Narcan is free and easy and available, and they do hand it out.
It'll
So
be
they'll
over
hand
the
you.
counter within months.
Okay, good.
There's an application before the FDA right now, I've heard, and it's probably gonna be more expensive oddly. But West Virginia has a lot of Narcan access, so we should be able to get it for free for the next 2 years.
And it's as easy as just putting the plunger and someone's nostril, pressing the plunger down. And that's all it takes. That's it. Yes.
You mentioned earlier about people who cause their own problems and why we should still pay attention to them. And you're right, but there's an additional reason. And that is some of these people who cause their own problems in the process of pursuing causing their own problems, cause other people problems.
Oh, yes. Yes, so now we can talk about the web of criminality first. And so, of course, if you're engaging in unlawful distribution of illegal drugs, you are probably connecting up with some people who are dangerous, people who are engaged in other criminal activity, from money laundering to robbery to even murder. It's bad business all the way around. And so the number of victims we talked about earlier, it's like throwing the big rock into the pond. That wave of victims just spreads out from the crime. Yeah, it's bad. Yeah.
What is funding, is it the mix of state and federal for our drug courts? How much is it? Is it adequate? And what would be your wish list?
You were asking about funding, the mix of state and federal? Okay, we can get real specific about Jefferson County. We currently do not have a grant writer that writes grants for our treatment court. Berkeley County does. I've recently spoken to a person who might be willing to volunteer or maybe do it for some pay, to start trying to pull down some federal grants for us. But right now, we pretty much live off of money we fundraise. We did a fundraiser late last year, and money that the participants themselves have to pay for their participation in treatment court. The total budget for the state for treatment courts is very, very low. I think it was $5 million last year was the total budget that we're applying to it. To compare that to a year of incarceration for a single felon, it's.
Compare that to the $1 billion surplus.
As a judge, I stay completely out of politics.
Oh,
You mentioned towards the end of the presentation that you're a volunteer.
Yes, I do not get paid any additional money for volunteering for treatment court. And most of the people on our treatment team don't get paid anything additional. Our probation officer, it's within her duties, but everyone else shows up out of love in their heart.
So what percentage of your judge time would we take?
Oh, I love this question. So what percentage of our judge time? Well, if you look at the schedule, you'll see we meet at 3 o'clock every Monday, and we typically go for 2 hours. The first part of it is a multidisciplinary team where we sit down and discuss how each participant's doing. And then we go out into the courtroom, and then we talk to all the participants. If I said to you it's just 2 hours a week, I'd be a big fat liar, because it's every day. There is something going on every day where we're on the emails, we're having discussions, we're trying to talk about what to do, what's working, what's not working, what's happened. So I don't know how much time, to be honest. I don't keep a timesheet. I can just tell you it's some part of every day. And like when Jackie died, it was a weekend that happened. I mean, it's all the time. Thank you.
We had a question on Zoom. Someone who said they were a recovery coach but haven't been involved since COVID and asked if there is a refresher course available.
I am sure I'm not an instructor on coaching, but I am sure if they contact the agency that taught them in the first place or one of the other agencies in the area, they could get the retraining, get back up to speed on it. We don't require masks in the courthouse. They're encouraged or welcome if you want to wear one. For the most part, most people don't at this point, but if they're willing to get back involved, please do.
I did a volunteer support group for people with a death loss for 20 years. And I frankly, not getting paid is the point, you know. But I don't have an OD, a drug. My mother died of cancer when I was 19, which gave me kind of a sourdough of empathy, you might say. I don't have an experience of my own, and I think that's necessary. That's my question.
All right, so there's plenty of room for people that have never had a history of having substance use disorder. We also have many participants, including on our treatment team, who do have a history. Two of our counselors do right now, one coach does. And they are invaluable for understanding motivations, what's going on with people, and addressing directly what the problems are. They've lived it, they know.
If I could kind of make you feel a little better, a lot of people, when I got sober in 2016, a lot of people were saying, you know what, if somebody hasn't been there, I don't want them to help me, they can't help me. The person who actually helped me achieve recovery had never experienced it, and he put it in a way everyone in this country experiences and struggles with compulsion. Go into Golden Corral. I mean, everyone in this country struggles with some sort of compulsion, and that's what we need to kind of focus on, not
Okay.
the differences.
I think this is if a person can express themselves, you know, communicate and only say things that the person who's in recovery know are true. That's the key. They can only say things that they know recognize as true. And
I
those are my
actually don't, I mean, Mr. Surkamp's point is that you need to speak truth, and that's certainly true. But I would disagree a little. I don't think speaking over truth,
right? Care is
it's
first.
the empathy, it's the care,
Yep.
it's the being there. You know, when the call comes in at one in the morning and you answer your phone and you say, you know, what is it, Jim? And Jim says, I'm feeling like I'm gonna mess up. That's what matters.
Yeah.
It's connectedness, connect the person. We've gone to volunteer events where during COVID, we were loading up boxes of food for people that couldn't get out to stores and needed food. I had some of my participants come out and participate. They loved it. They loved it. They were connecting to other people. They felt so useful.
Yeah.
You actually said it right there on the screen, you just have to care.
You just have to care.
There
That's the
you
big
go.
One other thing folks can do, we've had a moratorium on opioid treatment programs, methadone programs for God, 10, 11 years now. And so we're down to like 8 in the state. It's about an hour and a half average drive for somebody to get to that clinic, and you're supposed to go every day, but the programs are expanding. People are allowed to take home methadone now, so it's getting more flexible, but we still have this moratorium in place. So if people are interested in doing more, contacting your state representatives about that, because I know from the DHHR side, there are plenty of folks who are trying to educate legislators about the benefits of methadone. The overdose that led to the original moratorium wasn't even from an opioid treatment program, it was from a pain management type use of methadone. So that's something that we can do, you know, to be more advocates.
Methadone is clearly one of the substances that's amongst the gold standard for treatment. And unfortunately, maybe just because it came into being before we knew as much about addiction as we know now, some bad things happened. And of course, there was always a concern about diversion and substituting one drug for another. And a lot of communities didn't want methadone clinics because they had people who were addicted to substances showing up every day, and they felt like that was a bad thing. So you know, being able to take it home, not having to incur the cost to travel, how are you supposed to hold a job if you need to stand in line for, you know, drive first to a clinic, stand in line for some long period of time, be observed taking it, and then finally get to drive home? That's like, could be a 3-4 hour chunk out of your day, makes it very hard to be employed. So there's a lot that could be done on that. I know there was another question somewhere, where was it? I got them all?
Thank you.